Welcome to Before Dieting. I'm your host, Bronwyn Fletcher. In today's bite-sized episode, we're going to be looking at charting, and we'll be hearing about Karen's story and how her inability to lose 20 kilograms of weight had plagued her for a significant number of years. By using charting, her story turned up some interesting twists and turns. Listen in. When I talk about charting with women, though, who've had long histories of dieting, they often think about what they're tracking. So they track calories, or they track macros, or they track the number of steps that they've taken. And all of those can, in fact, be turned into charts. But the type of charting I want to focus on in this episode is the type of charting that takes in the entire food story, the entire weight story of a woman. And so when we're talking about charting here, we actually are talking about putting lines on two axes. But the types of things that people think that they need to put on there. So, for example, someone may not remember what weight they weighed when they were 23, but yet they know what weight they weigh now because they're obviously stepping on the scales on a regular basis. But when we're talking about this type of charting, you don't need to really remember how much weight you lost or gained, although some women really know that, particularly when they've had a baby, large weight gain with a baby. But what we're talking about is the sense of, and maybe how that chart actually looks over time. So it's not that we're going to have you weigh 26 kilos here and 77 kilos here, but it's really about the pattern and the history of that weight. So I thought it would be useful for this episode to actually talk about Karen's story, because Karen actually really does represent a lot of women that I speak with. I should point out that I've never met Karen in person. She actually found me through another colleague. She really heard that I was doing something different about weight. So you'll understand why she was interested in talking as I tell you a little bit about her story. I organised to speak with Karen by phone, so I've never met her face-to-face, as I said. I don't know what she looks like, I don't know what weight she is, and all of that is really irrelevant to what we're talking about here now. So when I first opened up the conversation with Karen, I asked her to tell me what was the situation currently, what was she trying to do, and then we would go into her history a little bit further and we'd find out different things. But to start with, she really had what most women have, and that is that she has a snapshot view of the current situation. So she knows what she weighs, she knows what she wants to weigh, and she's frustrated that she's tried so many different things and she doesn't seem to be able to shift this very particular 20 kilos. And as the conversation progressed, the repetition of this 20 kilos was one constant. So she had actually had this number in mind and she wanted to be without that number. So her focus was what she was eating currently, how much she weighed, what she was able to get that 20 kilos to vary. Sometimes she was still able to actually lose 1 or 2 kilos with that. But the real strong message now that she was hitting her 40s and perimenopause was really also adding to the issue of not being able to lose weight. She really was focused on the fact that all the old methods that she used to use to seem no longer to be working at all. So she was really not quite desperate, but I could hear in her voice that she was heading down towards that. I asked Karen to tell me what she'd been trying and using to lose this weight. And as it seemed to have been going on for quite a while, she had quite a history of trying different things. She told me that she'd been to Weight Watchers twice, and the total number of years that took up, sounded like she was really frustrated because she'd put in all this effort, and again, she wasn't able to solve this problem permanently. She had also tried several diets, the names she couldn't now recall, and her recent efforts tended to focus on restrictive eating by time. So we might think about that as the 5 and 2 diet, or we might think about that as eating between a limited time frame. Classic one would be somebody only starts their eating day at 10 o'clock and they might finish it by 6:30 at night. So they're really eating in this condensed time. That hadn't really worked for Karen. She wasn't able to stick with that. So it actually basically sent her eating off in all sorts of different directions. She came to the conclusion herself that maybe because she wasn't that fussed on eating breakfast, maybe she would eliminate breakfast and then she would just start her eating at lunch. because she had a drive to get to her job and she wasn't that fussed on eating, going without breakfast didn't really seem to trouble her at all. But she hadn't made the connection between visiting the vending machine at work and, as she put it, inhaling 2 to 3 blocks of chocolate. Then that she hadn't made the connection back to the fact that she had been missing breakfast. Her thoughts were she's very prepared to try anything, but she didn't really have a lot of success with the things that she tried. She was very disappointed about the Weight Watchers because that is a community-based thing, meeting with other people, other women who are trying to do the same things. In my next part of the conversation with Karen, what I was doing was trying to establish what kind of pattern her weight was following. To give a couple of examples, there are some women who put on weight rapidly and then basically bounce around at a top or high level of weight, trying to actually solve it from there. Some women put on weight, lose a lot of weight, gain more weight, put it back on. So they have a kind of sawtooth pattern if we start to chart that out on a diagram. Then there are others that actually have this very low, slow climb, and dieting doesn't really seem to have much effect on that climb. So there's a number of different ways that the weight pattern can look that is very useful and helpful in figuring out what might be sitting behind that. So this is just a visual representation of it. So when I asked Karen when did her weight problem, in her view, actually start, she talked about a period of time, probably she thought was around about 10 years ago. And so I said, what might have been happening in your life 10 years ago? And without hesitating, she said, that's when I got divorced. That was quite a significant piece of information. She then volunteered that once she had been divorced and then living by herself, the fact that there wasn't this daily conflict going on in the household, she felt at peace and she could eat when she wanted, what she wanted, without anybody observing what she was doing. And so for a while, that actually really helped her recover from a divorce. What was happening is that loneliness soon set in. And so that food combination with loneliness started to create more of a problem with the amount of stuff that she was eating, and particularly that she was eating a lot more of the highly processed foods. And of course, she already told me that her nemesis was chocolate. So that was actually what was happening there. So I asked Karen, would she mind if I talked to her a bit about the divorce, and was she okay to give me some idea about what might have been at the cause of that? There are 1,001 different reasons people can actually have a relationship breakup and end up with a divorce. Again, she was very straightforward that she felt that the marriage had fallen apart after the death of their 8-year-old daughter. And that was a startling piece of information to hear in this conversation. And went on to tell me that her daughter was 8 years old. It was her only daughter. The effect of that on her eating was that she basically stopped eating herself. She just, as she put it, she had lost her interest in anything in life. Food was just being one of them. So during that 1 to 2 years following the death of her daughter, she actually had lost weight because she, as she said, she really just lost interest in everything. About 2 years after her daughter had died, she said she started to feel things again. And the first thing she felt was absolute rage. And she knows that food played a part in helping her manage that rage. And the rage was just the injustice of the fact that her daughter had died for no reason. Like, what was the reason? And so this eating at that time started to really accelerate. And it was pretty rapid that she then ended up with this 20 kilos, which she's now still trying to resolve. The 20 kilos that we were discussing from her current situation was accumulated in its first instance all those years ago. So the point that we're trying to actually get across with charting is that, first of all, that is a devastating situation to happen to anybody. And throughout that time, food played an important part, first of all, in that initial grief period where she lost interest in eating altogether, but then actually it picked up again once she did start to actually re-enter the world, if you want to think about it that way. Food has been all the way throughout, and the thing about it is that everybody's story is different. Everybody's chart will look different. The life events that we experience will be different. It's really important that you actually understand what your food story is, because you can see from hearing Karen's story a diet is not really going to solve what is at the core of her weight problem. Once she's able to gain some assistance with that, then a good quality diet, a diet that doesn't actually cause starvation to trigger you to go to the vending machine to actually, get a couple of those chocolate bars. The fact is that the diet has to come secondary. It has to actually come after you've actually figured out what is your history, what is the story. Because Karen's story is that food has been a solution for Karen in this situation. The key takeaways from this episode about charting is that tracking that we do with calories and steps and macros, that's really short term. What we're talking about here with charting is that it is the long range. We want to have a look at those trends across time, across the full arc of your weight story, and not just actually have that snapshot from the last diet and whether it failed or whether you lost a couple of kilos. When we actually look at charting in the longer term as well, it really can start to show up what are the unseen emotional patterns that actually sit underneath the surface. And that's where a very simple picture comes back to that point that once you actually can see it, you can then start to do something about it. At the start of my conversation with Karen, she just wanted to know if I had something that would help her with those 20 kilos that she talked about continually. But once she could visualize her weight over her adult life, then everything changed. For the first time, she could make the connections between her weight and what had happened in her life. Previously, when she thought about that 20 kilos, it was like a battle, that it was always about self-sabotage, that if she could just stop the chocolate blowout, she'd hit her goal. But by the end of our conversation, she could see that sometimes eating is the only thing that helped her survive. So to finish up, I'd like to give you 3 takeaways from this episode. The first one is that your weight story is bigger than the food. If you have a repeating weight pattern, until you see the whole picture, diets will always feel like that's the solution. And as you can see from Karen's story, the diet would have to come much, much later. The second point is what looks like self-sabotage could in fact be survival, and that in some way, the way that you have been eating has been protecting you. And the third one, and last, is that real change starts with seeing the picture, seeing the system that's operating, looking at that pattern over time. So it's not just about switching eating plans or getting the latest diet. Those will have limited effect if you've actually not been able to identify what sits at the core of your repeating weight pattern. Thanks for listening. If this episode has really sort of struck a chord with you, head on over to the Waiting for Happiness website and check out our Weight and Dieting History program. It'll go into a lot more detail than you've probably ever thought to when looking to solve your recurring weight problem. And if the episode you think would be valuable to another woman, then please help us by passing it on. I'll talk to you in the next episode. Bye now.